Alright, welcome to another edition of Cass's Belly Baby. Your host, Cam Ray. Moses, Part 4. That's where we're at. We're going to be talking about the military organization and system and structure for the most part. So, let's get on with it. Conscription and deferments in ancient Israel during the time of Moses. Conscriptions and deferments. Moses understood that if they were to continue, they could not continue with the scant military in its present state. While the Israelites had success in defeating an Amalekite army at Rephidim, Moses knew that they were just one battle away from defeat, which could ultimately lead to the destruction of the Israelites. Therefore, Moses institutes the first Israelite draft. In order to fill the ranks of their tribal militia, Moses and the elders decided to base their military structure around the Egyptian conscription system. To fill these ranks, Moses conscripts able-bodied men for military duty who are 20 or older, for exemptions from participating in war. Exemptions included having built a house that has not yet been dedicated, or planning a vineyard that a conscript has yet to eat from, or perhaps just being fearful and faint-hearted. Those who are just married were also exempt from military service. So there you go. Those who are exempt from military service, you're looking at those who are too lighthearted, who haven't even planted a garden, I guess you'd say, a farmland, or who just got married. However, for a lot of these guys, it'd almost be everybody when you think about it at this time period. I mean, come on. Moses and them, they're out in the wilderness running around. It's not like they're really settled anywhere to do any of this stuff exactly. But anyways, there has to be an army. So, creation of an Israelite army. Take ye the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel, after their families, by the house of their fathers, with the number of the names, every male by their polls. From 20 years old and upward, all that are able to go forth to war in Israel. Thou and Aaron shall number them by their armies, and wish you there shall be a man of every tribe, every one head of the house of his fathers. In the book of Numbers, chapter 1, verses 21 through 43, the total force drafted is below. The descendants of Reuben is somewhere, it says 46,500. The descendants of Simeon is at 59,300. The descendants of Gad, 45,650. The descendants of Judah, 74,600. Of Issachar, 54,400. Of Zebulun, 57,400. Of Ephraim, 40,500. Manasseh, 32,200. Benjamin, 35,400. Dan, 62,700. Asher, 41,500. And Naphtali, 53,400. In all, 603,550 were drafted for military service, but the number changes in chapter 26. The tribe of Reuben now has 43,730. Simeon now has 22,200. Gad, 40,500. Judah, 76,500. Issachar, 64,300. Zebulun, 60,500. Ephraim, 32,500. Manasseh, 52,700. Benjamin, 45,600. Dan, 64,400. Asher, 53,400. And Naphtali, 45,400. In all, 601,730 are serving. While it is tempting to accept this list, the fact of the matter is these numbers are bumped, considering that later on at the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE, both the Egyptian and Hittite armies could each only muster 20,000 or slightly more. It's not that numbers lie, rather they are accurate but miscalculated. This is due to the term Eleph. The term Eleph, if I'm pronouncing that right, if someone out there can speak Hebrew or translate it, please. E-L-E-P-H, Eleph, I believe that's how it's pronounced, means 1,000. The term came to mean 1,000 during the time of the monarchy, when units of 1,000 men were called Alaphim. I'm not sure how to pronounce that one. A-L-A-P-H-I-M, Alaphim. However, the term Eleph can mean clan, and if so, it changes the structure. Instead of looking at Eleph to mean 1,000, consider the term is describing units rather than numbers. George E. Mendenhall sums it up well. I have a chart here from George E. Mendenhall. It's from the census list of numbers 1 through 26, Journal of Biblical Literature 77, 1958, pages 52 through 66. If you can, I believe you can find that at JSTOR if possible. George E. Mendenhall, the census list of numbers 1 and 26, Journal of Biblical Literature 77, 1958, pages 52 through 66. If you want to check that out, please do so. Now his list is different. But given that only 5,500 or 5,750 men made up the total fighting force, indicates that the population they are sworn to protect may have been between 20 to 25,000. This changes a lot when you look at his list, because what Mendenhall is promoting here is basically, if we go back and we look at the descendants of Reuben, if we look at Numbers chapter 1, verses 21 through 43, the descendants of Reuben is listed at 46,500. It seems more reasonable, given what the term Eleph can mean, clan, or mean 1,000. It changes it. In other words, Reuben, it's not 46,500 men, it's 46 units of the total of 500 men. Or that's in Numbers 1. Numbers 26, it's 43 units, which equal out to 750 men. Simeon would be 59 units, which equal only 300 men in Numbers 1, while in Numbers 26, it's 22 units, 200. So basically, it all changes. Gad becomes 45 units of 650. Judah, 74 units of 600. So this is where Mendenhall gets the idea that it's not as many men as we think it is. It's probably between 5,500 and 5,750 men that make up the total fighting force out of a population probably between 20 and 25,000. Now, manufacturing weapons. Here's another one. It's very interesting, the manufacturing of weapons. How do they manufacture their weapons out there? Little material, little metals. The manufacturing of arms and armor is crucial to equipping and supplying an army. The Israelites were no exception. As they despoiled the Egyptians, it was imperative that they grab metal objects made of copper, tin, and bronze in order to manufacture such armaments later. Exodus chapter 3, verses 21, chapter 11, verses 2, and chapter 12, verse 35 do not mention the metals needed to manufacture arms. The only metals mentioned that were taken were of gold and silver. But if one turns to Exodus chapter 25, verse 3, and Exodus chapter 35, verse 5, notice that Moses asked the people to provide bronze to construct the tabernacle at Sinai. This tells us that the Israelites owned personal objects made of bronze, much of which was acquired when they stripped the Egyptians. Another problem the Israelites faced in the wilderness was obtaining the skills needed to manufacture bronze weapons. Casting bronze was not an easy or common skill. Exodus is silent when it comes to the smiths. One could make the argument that there were no blacksmiths available within the camp. On the other hand, there could have been a few available that did not have the equipment to produce the much-needed weapons, or they had no skill in forging armaments. So how did the Israelites produce enough weapons to equip an army of 5,000 or so? The answer can be found at Sinai. The reason why Moses led the Israelites to Sinai and to the base of Mount Horeb comes down to relatives, copper, and the metal workers who lived there. Moses knew well the area of Sinai and Mount Horeb, an alternative name for Mount Sinai, where Moses used to lead Jethro's flock to the, quote, to the backside of the desert and come to the mountain of God, even Horeb, end quote. Moses' father-in-law Jethro was a Kenite/Midian priest who lived in the lands of Midian. This is why Moses led the Hebrews to Mount Sinai, for he was familiar with the territory and familiar with the resources mined and forged at Sinai. While Moses and a few others with him were familiar with the sights and sounds at Sinai, most of the Israelites and those tagging along were not, especially on the morning of the third day. Quote, and it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and a voice of the trumpet exceeded loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. End quote. While it's possible that Yahweh did descend in a thunderous roar, accompanied by spectacular lightning and smoke atop Mount Sinai, perhaps there was another alternative to consider. Perhaps the sound of thunder the Israelites heard was none other than the metalsmiths atop the mountain who were smelting and hammering away. The flashes of what appears to be lightning was nothing more than the flickering of high flames produced by the furnaces. As for the cloud of smoke, that was caused by the furnaces, as it takes twice to 4 times as much charcoal to smelt copper as compared to iron, which would produce a heavy cloud of smoke. In all, the mountain landscape would have sounded and appeared eerie to the Israelites below. The clue that links the possibility altogether is the Kenites. The Kenites lived in oasis towns in the lands of Midian and Sinai, where they mined the abundant, rich copper ore at various spots located in southwestern and southeastern Sinai. Furthermore, their location at the copper mines was not far from the trade routes that passed through Sinai, which allowed them to sell their goods and purchase the expensive tin needed to produce bronze, which was rare in the Middle East. The name Kenite comes from the Hebrew word Quayin, I believe that's how you pronounce it, which means smith or metalworker. Once again, please, if someone out there speaks Hebrew, always just leave a comment. The Kenites were well-known metalworkers, and their craftsmanship was acknowledged from the lands as far south as Arad to Nigrib, and as far north as Kadesh, near the lands of Naphtali. Because of their knowledge of metallurgy, many came to despise and fear them, and often linked their trade to magic. Because of this fear, harbored primarily by nomadic tribes around them, the Kenites remained isolated and even forbid intermarriage. While nomadic groups feared them, the reality is the Kenites were safeguarding their assets by keeping a tight monopoly on the metalsmiths, for they could forge weapons. However, this seems not to be the case during this period, at least with the group of Kenites. While nomads distanced themselves, the agriculture communities embraced them and often settled with them within their own community and encouraged intermarriage, as in the case of Moses marrying Jethro's daughter. Let's see. Because of this close association with the Kenites, Moses not only established family ties with them that led to their future integration with the Israelite community, but he knew the artisan's value. The Kenites' value to Moses and later Joshua at Gilgal was that the Kenites could mine copper and procure the expensive tin and charcoal through trade in order to manufacture weapons. While many see Moses leading the Israelites to Sinai to establish a covenant with Yahweh, the fact of the matter is Moses also established a covenant with the Kenites to be their arms dealers. This is why Moses came to Sinai, to buy arms using the gold and silver stripped from the Egyptians. Okay, what about their command structure? With a semi-professional force now established, a command and control structure was needed to provide logistics, weapons, communications, and above all, effective leadership. Without these attributes, the Hebrew military, from a strategic and tactical level, could not function in the field of battle. But what did the Hebrew command structure look like? The Bible indicates that officers should be established to command their respective tribal militias. The book of Numbers, chapter 31, verse 48, states that there would be, quote, officers in charge of the thousands, end quote, the commanders of thousands, and the commanders of hundreds, end quote. While this description provides some detail on their command structure, it is still lacking. When turning back to Numbers, chapter 2, verses 2 through 29, one begins to see who is in charge and in what order. Let's look at the Eastern Division. Here's the Eastern Division. Judah, Issachar, Zebulun. They have an officer and 2 captains. Southern Division. Reuben, Simon, Gad. Officer, 2 more captains. Western Division. Ephraim, Manasseh, Benjamin. Same ordeal. Northern Division. Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. Same thing. 4 officers, 8 captains. This account provided by Numbers chapter 2, verses 2 through 29 indicates that the Israelite camp/military was divided into 4 segments with 4 officers in charge along with 8 commanders. With this information, we gain a rough sense of how the Israelite military structure under Moses looked. About marching orders. With the establishment of the command structure in place, the marching order of the Israelite military organization remains unclear until they left Sinai. Once they left Sinai, the book of Numbers, chapter 10, verses 11 through 28, provides the reader a partial picture of their military structure. The picture indicates that the marching column was divided into 4 divisions, with each division led by tribal levies containing 2 additional tribal levies within it. Numbers chapter 10, verses 11 through 28, informs us that the tribe of Judah was the leading division, with the tribe of Issachar ahead of them. Behind Issachar and in front of Judah was the tribe of Zebulun. Behind Judah were the Levite clans of Gershon and Merari. however you pronounce that name. Behind them were the Gadites. Behind Gad were the Simeonites, and behind the Simeons were the Reuben division. Behind the division of Reuben was the Levitical clan of Kohath. Behind Kohath was the Benjaminites, and behind the tribe of Benjamin was the tribe of Manasseh. Behind Manasseh stood the division of Ephraim, and behind Ephraim stood the division of Dan. Behind Dan was the tribe of Asher, and with Naphtali bringing up the rear of the formation. It is without a doubt that the formation and the order of battle the Israelites are marching in was the one they adopted from the Egyptians. But a question remains: why were the tribes set in this order? The book of 1 Chronicles, chapter 12, provides that answer. That answer comes down to warrior characteristics. Even though 1 Chronicles chapter 12 is about David's mighty men, I get that. It has nothing to do with the Exodus. It does provide us a picture. It does provide us a picture as to why the Hebrew battle formation was designed a certain way. The men of Issachar who were sent ahead of the formation were chosen because they, quote, were men that had understood of times to know what Israel ought to do, end quote. In other words, they were scouts. It was their duty to collect intelligence, report back, and give advice. Next was Zebulun. Zebulun provided elite heavy spear infantry who fought in the phalanx formation, for they were, quote, expert in war with all instruments of war, end quote. Judah, unlike Zebulun, was not an elite heavy spear infantry. Judah, quote, bore shield and spear, end quote, and were deemed regular heavy infantry. Judah's duty was to protect the disassembled tabernacle when on the move. When Judah is in front of the Levites, behind the Levites is the tribe of Gad, quote, who could handle shield and buckler, whose faces were like lions, and were as swift as roes upon the mountains, end quote. Gad is indeed a light infantry unit. Their duty was to provide a skirmishing screen ahead of the main body of infantry and harass the enemy in an attempt to slow his advance. The same could be said for the tribe of Simeon, who were, quote, mighty men of valor, end quote, but the Bible remains silent on their specialty in arms. The Reuben division, along with the tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim, were no doubt a mixture of light infantry. For 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 18 states that they are, quote, valiant men, men able to bear buckler and sword, and to shoot with the bow, and skillful in war, end quote. The tribe of Ephraim is described as, quote, mighty men of valor, end quote. However, given that the tribe of Manasseh was their tribal brother through Joseph, it is likely that Ephraim shared in the same military capabilities as Manasseh. The Benjaminites had a specialty, for they, quote, were armed with bows and could use both the right hand and the left in hurling stones and shooting arrows out of a bow, end quote. The Danite division, along with the tribe of Asher, made up the rear, but no description is given pertaining to their combat specialty. Given that they made up 2/3 of the rear, it is possible that the tribes of Dan and Asher were a mixture of light and heavy infantry. Bringing up the end of the column was the heavy infantry of Naphtali, who were carrying, quote, shield and spear, end quote. Overall, the Israelites had a good assortment of scouts, light infantry, bow and arrow, slingers, sword, and buckler, heavy infantry, shield, spear, or lance, and sword. The Hebrew order of battle was likely an adaptation of the Egyptian military system. With all this in mind, let's talk about the diet of the Hebrew soldier. It's kosher. Another problem the Hebrews faced was food shortages. What had been taken out of Egypt, whether water, plant, or animal, would have been quickly consumed, even though the Midianites did advise the Hebrews on where to search for food and water. They were still living on a makeshift diet. The need to grow food and to breed new livestock to replenish what had been consumed was vastly important. On top of that, they needed to feed that very source was important. Both man and beast, in one sense or another, were at war over the scraps found in the harsh wilderness. It is no wonder that so few of the original exiles made it to the Promised Land because of food shortages. The Hebrews complained continually and recalled how good their diet was while living in Egypt, with fish, cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. They went from a steady, varied diet in Egypt to a slow death in the wilderness. Given that food is a crucial substance to maintain health and longevity, the combat soldier in the modern world needs 3 MREs a day, which have roughly 1,250 calories, each containing 13% protein, 36% fat, 51% carbohydrates. Okay, not all of them do. I've ate a lot of MREs in my time. A lot of them are a lot fattier and got a hell of a lot more calories, but that's kind of the average, though. In total, the modern soldier would consume on a daily basis 3,750 calories a day to maintain health. In the ancient world, roughly 3 pounds of wheat per person was the standard. However, 3 pounds of wheat only provided in that individual 2,025 calories per day. While this is sufficient for a short time, it is insufficient overall and lacks the nutritional requirements needed for a fully functional soldier to survive. The modern soldier needs 5 quarts of water per day, but under desert conditions, the U.S. and Israeli Defense Force recommended 9 quarts a day. However, it seems apparent that the Hebrew soldier did not have wheat in the wilderness and lacked a sufficient supply of water. So what did he live on? The answer is quail, manna, and cheese. Beef and mutton are a possibility, but livestock was a herder's source of food and income and in scarcity. Whatever they ate in order to survive was not enough, as the Bible makes clear. After many decades in the wilderness, only few leaders who made it out of Egypt were alive. This tells us that starvation, thirst, diseases, exposure, and power struggles decimated the original population that left Egypt and much of their livestock. Okay, besides diet, well, we got hygiene, so let's talk about the hygiene of the soldier. Really, it'd be the hygiene of the entire camp. Maintaining good hygiene is important for the health and well-being of an army. When the Hebrew army is living and traveling alongside the civilian population, it becomes more important. Regardless of whether the army is living among the civilian population or far away in barracks, keeping clean and staying healthy is universal. For the Hebrews traveling with Moses, health practices seem almost non-existent. Understand that the Hebrews did not have physicians traveling with them. One could say the Levites were the physicians, but they were not. The Levites were spiritual physicians and nothing more. What they lacked in medical procedures, they were able to provide the community with a series of cleanliness laws, sanitary practices, found in the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Check it out. Keeping clean to stave off sickness and disease is one thing, but treating the illness from a physician's position seems lacking. This is not to say the Levitical priest ignored the ill. However, most of them did so for fear of losing their own lives, and this is understandable. And besides, if a person is found to be ill, it must be due to his or her sins. This notion is backed in 2 verses. The first is found in Exodus chapter 15, verse 26, which states, I am the Lord that healeth thee, end quote. Second, Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 39 states, quote, I wound, I heal, neither is there any that can deliver out of my hand, end quote. In other words, everyone who sins will be visited by illness, and there is nothing a Levite can do about it, for it is in God's hands. This is why the Hebrews did not have physicians to treat the sick. But this is not to say the Israelites could not try to ease the pain of the suffering, okay? One such treatment mentioned is hyssop, an antiseptic plant, some other wild plant. It's all mentioned in Numbers chapter 19, verse 18. It says, and quote, and a clean person shall take hyssop and dip it in the water and sprinkle it upon the tent and upon all the vessels and upon the persons that were there and upon him that touched a bone or one slain or one dead or a grave, end quote. Even though this is just one verse mentioning one antidote, this one verse does show that even without physicians on hand, they had some knowledge and did the best in treating the ill. With the knowledge, even with the belief in God curses and cures the individual. The Israelites believed that illness comes from God as a result of moral transgression. What did they think about injuries and required surgery? That's another one. The injuries of a Hebrew soldier, say a guy breaks his limb or received a nasty wound, were not caused by God, which means he did not commit a moral transgression in contracting them. Such an injury, which can lead to illness, was no mystery at all, because the victim had been wounded. Therefore, a Levite or anyone else could treat the injury. It becomes evident that the Hebrews had little or no training in the knowledge of medicine, since such as the sophisticated medical practices of those they had escaped from, the Egyptians. Even the Sumerians, long before the Hebrews, had a much greater understanding of medical procedures in treating the ill. Because of this lack in knowledge, they decided that illness must be the will of God. This view greatly hurt them until after they returned from Babylonian exile. After that, the Hebrews' knowledge of medicine grew greatly, but their religious beliefs held them back. No wonder Moses and the Hebrews suffered so much in the wilderness. Starvation, which led to disease and death, had nothing to do with moral transgressions. Instead, it was due to the decisions made by their leader, Moses, and the willingness of their elders to go along. All right, that's it for Moses Part 4. We're going to continue on. The next step will be in Moses Part 5. We're going to look at the Jordan Valley campaign, so stay tuned for that. It gets pretty bloody from here on out. Okay, so if you like the little mini lecture, give me a thumbs up, leave your comments below, no fighting. Please, by all means, share this if you want with your friends. Check out my website. It's www.camrea.org. That's www.camrea.org. You can find all kinds of other stuff there that I've wrote. And look me up on Facebook. You can find me there too. Cam Ray. It's not hard to, you can spot me or any of my pages. And that'll be all. So until next time, take it easy.